Hey, it's Mark Kelly here from What I Know Now. What I Know Now is a leadership and personal development podcast. If you haven't listened to the show before, What I Know Now, we ask people from all walks of life their story to now. We ask about their highs, their lows, but ultimately, if they had a coffee with their 18-year-old self, what advice would they offer? So I am sitting here with Chris Flack. Chris is the CEO of Unplugged. Hey, Chris.
Hello, Mark.
So, Chris, could you give me a little bit of an overview about yourself and your journey to now?
My name is Chris. I'm from England originally. I've been living in Ireland for about 15 years. And for the majority of my working career, I spent that time with big tech companies. So working in consultancy and sales for big companies like Capgemini and Avnet. I was always somebody who was very much a big fan of technology. So I would have been one of the first people in the office to get an iPhone, one of the first people to get an iPad, and probably one of the first people to be online 24/7. And for me, I always thought that was a really positive thing. What I then found in the more recent years was it started just to affect my productivity and well-being, so impacting my sleep and my relationships, and even my ability to make targets, because I'd always done pretty well in sales, and then all of a sudden I was finding I was getting distracted by things that were lower priority. So I actually changed career about 5 years ago. I'd had an interest in the not-for-profit sector. I'd just been volunteering with a lot of charities, and I decided just to take some time focusing on that. So it meant I spent a lot of time overseas. I actually spent a year and a half pretty much off the grid, specifically in India, working with water aid and sanitation. And what I found during that time was I became so aware of how technology was impacting our behavior, because I was spending time away from technology and then coming back and seeing, okay, even my mum she's spending a lot of time just looking at her iPad, which I bought her, as opposed to spending time with me. Now that's a funny example with my mum. Was when I first came back, I think it was her 70th birthday, and I was sat opposite her and I hadn't seen her for 8 or 10 months. And I kind of felt a pull to check my Facebook as opposed to being in the room with her. And immediately that was a flag to me that this was a problem for me, but I looked around and it seemed to be a problem for everybody, or a challenge at least. So I then kind of became interested in the science around habit change. And I started to talk to friends who are academics, so psychologists and neuroscience experts, and started to realize there's a lot of research out there that shows if we just make some small changes in how we use technology, it can have some really positive impacts on our, what we would call digital well-being, so primarily productivity and well-being. And that essentially is the seeds for Unplug. And we started researching end of 2014. So I spent a lot of time in the evenings, my day job, and then in the evenings I was speaking with professors in universities all around the world. And then beginning of last year, so beginning of 2015, we launched as a company last year. And now after a year of trading into the Irish market, we have 20 big names. And what we do essentially is run workshops, and we do coaching to help people improve their digital well-being. So primarily in the corporate space, that's around improving productivity, so focus and performance, and then well-being, so improving sleep, relationships. And we also work a couple of days a month in schools. So work with schools and colleges around helping students improve their ability to study, so helping them reduce distraction. So that's kind of the social element of what we do. And we have a couple of companies that are actually sponsoring schools programs for us for the next academic year, which is great.
It's really, really exciting. It's something that everybody is so connected now to the internet and their mobile phone, and it's literally you walk into a room, or even if you go to a playground, the parents aren't actually looking at the kids, they're just actually looking at their telephone, or they're actually just so focused and engrossed on it. When was the moment that you said, I just want to make a change? Was there was it build up, or was this a day? Was it like a Jerry Maguire moment?
There wasn't a Jerry Maguire moment. It was a very gradual thing for me. You know, I was kind of seeing change every time I came back from working overseas. And then when I started to join the dots around the science, because I'm a firm believer in kind of habit change, and not just say going into a room and talking to people about things that might make them feel better, but actually seeing behavior change that's going to have a positive impact for them in the long run. So for me, it's interesting because we kind of discussed this idea, so me and my business partner, for the last couple of years. And when we were initially discussing it, a lot of our peers were saying, it's a bit of a crazy one, lads, you know, this technology is great. And it's only really in the last 6 months where we've had companies coming to us saying this is really having an impact on productivity and our ability to make really good decisions. So it's one of those things where we were very confident, but pretty much everyone around us was saying negative stuff. So it's one of those things where we gradually built up the purpose and the passion for it, and we're constantly taking, obstacles of people saying no, and now we're in a place where it's definitely a business, but the need is growing hugely. And I mean, just one thing, and I kind of alluded to this at the beginning, but for us, technology is very much a positive thing, and it's about, as opposed to pushing it away, it's about finding that balance where we're in control as opposed to it controlling us. And I think a really simple example of that, and Deloitte's do this survey every year, which is a mobile survey just basically showing how we use technology. And Q4 last year, they showed that we're pretty much plugged in 24/7. So a couple of examples would be 40% of us check our phones within 5 minutes of waking up. And then around 50% of us check our phones in the middle of the night. Now that's actually something, they're two quite magical moments. First thing in the morning, we have a blank canvas with our mind, so it's where we can be really focused to make good decisions. And then in the middle of the night, sleep is the most key foundation for our well-being, and yet we're potentially interrupting it. If we look at that and say, if we were to plan the day, would we actually plan for those devices to interrupt those precious times? Sometimes they need to. There might be an emergency call from a family member or an emergency deal we have to work on. But typically they're interrupting times which are really, really important. And it's just kind of crept in very slowly. And I think that there's two ways that it's done that. One is culture, because we look around and everybody's looking at their phones. And the other is kind of the persuasive nature of technology. It's now built, a lot of the apps are built to gain and maintain our attention. Facebook has over 1,000 people behind the app whose job it is solely to keep you on that app. And that doesn't mean the technology companies are necessarily bad people. What they're doing is they're working in a very competitive landscape for our attention. So it's that balance of, they need to do things where the ethics are kind of questionable, but they're having to do that to survive as a business. So
I even find, and I don't use social media that much except for maybe LinkedIn and Instagram, but even on Instagram, it's constantly asking me to turn on my notifications.
Oh yes,
It's constantly turn on your notifications, turn on your notifications. And one thing I've learned is make sure your phone's notifications are off.
Yes.
Or you will be hounded with it. But it is fascinating to see how many of these companies have got dedicated, very, very big departments and large resources to getting your eyeballs, to checking updates or these different types of feeds, which does impact your well-being as well. We were talking about some of the different countries that have implemented different types of strategies around that, and I spoke about France, about how they were changing their strategy about how if you actually get accessing emails, there's a certain cut-off point.
The right to disconnect.
Right to disconnect as well. Have you seen much of that coming through?
I guess the most extreme would be some of the countries in Asia. So China, South Korea and Japan, governments have recognised tech addiction as an epidemic for about 10 years now. So they have quite extreme boot camps, which you would send your children off to for the summer. And what they typically do is kind of shock tactics. So they do things like give children a very small electric shock if they reach for the phone during the boot camp, which may work in certain cultures, but for us, we're all about positive behaviour change, and we're not sure as to, definitely wouldn't work here, and it's not something we'd recommend. But what's really positive there is the government are taking it on as being a big issue. And I think it's great that France have actually identified it as an issue. I'm not sure the legislation is necessarily the most effective way to do it, because we all have very different ways of working. Some of us might find that checking our phones in the morning is very good for us and very productive. Others, it could be the biggest distraction in the world. We all have different ways of our working hours and our way of delivering. So I think ideally that should come down to individual organisations. And there are a number of them out there that already do. They do what we would call digital wellbeing or tech life balance strategies. So the likes of Volkswagen would have all the Blackberries of their operational staff would switch off when they leave the office and then come on in the morning. Other companies like eBay have a no device policy in the majority of their senior management meeting. And I think it's bringing in those policies that more represent each individual culture.
Because you find, particularly in the millennials, that they like to work in their own type of way. So maybe that's actually going out, go to a concert, coming back, working from 9 to 3 in the morning, getting all their work done, and actually switching off then, and actually just being a lot more flexible. You find with the gig economy now as well, people want to work the way they want to work as well. So some of that legislation could be a little bit challenging compared to where the kind of the economy is going, about how people want to work?
It is, because we work in this culture now where it's kind of seen as a very positive thing to always be busy, and now we're discovering, just through kind of retention and talent acquisition, that that's not necessarily the best way to be. We need to have downtime, and I think if we look at the way of working, so the future of work around, should we be office-based or should we be at home? Right now, for the last number of decades since the Industrial Revolution, it's really been about, kind of once we became more office-based, it's been about spending that time in the office. And then in the last 10 years, this concept of home working has crept in. But I think with the younger generations coming into the workplace, what I'd love to see is more of a balance between the two, a blended approach. Because if people are encouraged to work at home too much, then we're going to be facing issues around solitude and loneliness. Because social fabric is something that's really, it's no longer core in cultures. Community, it's something that we all struggle with now. If we look in Ireland, I'm not religious, but I saw the church as being a very positive community foundation here, and the GAA is a very positive community foundation. They still are, but less and less so. And social media has kind of taken that over, which is can be positive to a certain extent, but in the long run, it's not. We need to have more human communities. So I think work can give that. So encouraging people to work at home too much, I think there needs to be the option to work together.
For me, it's a big concern, because if you look at back over 1 million years ago, how we've actually developed our brains has been through the storytelling and the importance of stories and actually coming together and connection. That's really, really important. But if we're all disconnected and actually not brought together, we don't learn as much and we don't develop as quickly from that. And that's why I've always been keen to have meetups. My preference is not to work from home. I have the opportunity to do some work from home, but I prefer not to, because I feel that you lose that kind of you learn from others, but also you get kind of the vibe of the environment that you're actually in. You can kind of sense it as well, and that can impact. I don't necessarily know if you can build meaningful relationships through social media that you can get just face to face. And that's why I try to do always meetings is face to face, always when I was selling, or even just when I was trying to just meet different people to solve a situation. And I think that's been my kind of mindset. But we were speaking earlier, tell me about how your day starts, because that's pretty interesting.
So 6 days a week, I'd wake up around 5 o'clock. Sunday is my crazy day. I sometimes stay in bed till 7. But I would wake up, first thing I do is my meditation. That's my rock for the day. I then do a number of different things depending on how I am with injuries. I'm 42. I have a multitude of injuries, so I need to make sure I'm always looking after those as well. But typically it'll be a mix of yoga practice, so asana, so the bendy stuff, and then either that or a cardiovascular, so I'll go out on the bike outside, or if it's raining, I have a spinner that I use. And then typically I do a number of small things, and these vary on the day. I will always do the meditation. The cardiovascular depends if I'm well, as far as if I have injuries. I have about 15 minutes of physio exercises I have to do for my back and my knee every day, just based on old injuries. Then I do a few other things, like, so I have a gratitude diary, and I also, probably about 80% of the time, I have a little dance. Just for 2 minutes, I'll just do some dancing, just jumping up and down. It's almost like a celebration of the start of the day. So that's kind of my foundation before I check any technology.
Do you listen to music with that dance, or do you just dance? Okay, have you got a favorite song?
I'm a big 80s fan, so Wham, Aha, all that kind of cheese, that rocks my boat.
I always find that if you can dance in the day, you know you're feeling really, really good. That you're up for it to do it. Because it's such a great feeling. It's ridiculous though if you looked at yourself, but it is a great feeling.
Yeah, it's magical. I mean, we're kind of going back to more animalistic, us, and we're these Stone Age bodies in a space age world, and that's not my quote, that's John Kabat-Zinn, but we're in these concrete jungles, and for us to get back to being the cavemen is to scream and shout and jump up and down, the more extreme form of that, because I have a very strong interest in yoga. I would do devotional singing, probably every other week, which is getting together as a community of people where there's guitar players, sitar players, and we all do chants of all different kind of cultures, and that vibration of coming together as a community doing, I think is absolutely fantastic. So I'd love that. It's a very far cry from Unplug program delivery, but just far more kind of evidence-based, psychological. But that's the stuff I love personally. Yeah.
I really like that you have such a sheer focus on the mental health and actually getting in the game and committing a time to actually its importance.
Yeah, and I think this is one thing that I feel is so important, because I've been through major issues with my mental health, been in and out of Clonamera, and so many people say they're over issues with their mental health, and I never see it like that. I always see my opportunity every day is to maintain and be more positive with my mental health. But it's a challenge. I have to do these things every day, and if I don't do them, then I can often feel myself slipping back.
Yeah.
So for me, it's almost as if I'm doing a mental health workout when I wake up. But that doesn't mean I'm focusing on the negative. What it means is I'm focusing on, this is going to give me the sense of calm. It's going to give me a sense of concentration and focus. And they're all things that, you know, we need in working life and very much challenging working lives as we all have now. I mean, my focus now is so much stronger than it used to be. It really is.
I find that there's so many different elements of fitness, mindset, the food we eat, all these different things that impact our clarity that
Yes.
which I knew 20 years ago. It's just, it's fascinating. And tell me about some of the apps that are positive apps that can actually put you in a good place to really help you manage your, I suppose, your techness.
Okay, so I'm going to give you two different ways I'm going to talk about apps. One is personal, and then the other is personal and work. So the first personal one is for meditation, which is Insight Timer. It's a free app, and the one very clever thing it does is, so it has whatever 5,000 meditations you can try from, but then at the end of the meditation, it will tell you who meditated around you. So we're not losing that element of social fabric. And somewhere like Dublin, you'll actually typically end up seeing someone you know after a couple of weeks, which is really, really lovely. So that's something I use personally every day. Within the workplace, and this does impact us as individuals as well, when it comes to what we do with Unplug, we have a number of stages of the program, and the first one is measure. So if we think of any change within our life, so if we're training for a triathlon, we do a training plan. If we're looking to lose some weight, then we do a diary of our nutrition and food. And ideally, in order just to kind of do an as-is of how much we use technology, we need just to gain a little bit of accountability for how many times we're swiping, how many times we're using the not so good types of technology, because technology is fantastic and it's about categorizing it into what's good and what's bad for you. We all know a lot of the more positive stuff, the educational stuff, so there might be videos on YouTube, there might be ways you're learning a language. It's great, but it's the entertainment, the shiny social media, which is great in small doses, but in too much can be really negative. So there's apps such as Rescue Time and Moment. Rescue Time is on Android and Moment is on iOS. And all you do is you have them running in the background, and then at the end of every week, it will just tell you, okay, look, you used these apps for a certain amount of time, you used these apps, let's say, in certain locations as well. So it might even come down to, okay, hang on, I'm checking my WhatsApp when I'm driving. This is one of the big issues out there as far as safety and as a distraction. But it's nice to have that as a benchmark to then see, well, is this an issue for me? Because many of us will underestimate how much we use technology, because it's often a very positive thing, so we're not seeing it as a negative. So it's just getting that benchmark.
One of the things I saw quite recently was in the UK, an answer that keeps coming up when people are actually doing a driving test is, what do you do when you stop at a red light?
Yeah, yeah.
And people answer, I check my phone.
Yeah. This is the most important thing for us, is to help people with habits and reduce the habit of distraction, because this is something that's just crept in. You know, 10 years ago, we're at the 10-year anniversary, right? Just a week ago of the iPhone, which is something that really needs to be celebrated, but it's also, let's just look at how it's impacted us. 10 years ago, people would have only looked at their phones just for phone calls and text messages. It was a totally different landscape. Whereas now you look around and everybody's looking down, and it's this whole thing of, so we've created a habit of distraction, which in some cases is fine if we're sat on the sofa, but success and satisfaction in life come from focus, which is the opposite of distraction, you know. So we need to just work those two and find balance in between.
Interestingly enough, Nokia have brought back their brick of a phone.
They have.
So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how far that's going to go.
I think with that, I love the fact they brought it back as far as, let's say, a media study which will raise awareness as far as how we use technology. But I think we have to remember that there's so much positive stuff with smartphones, and because of that, we have a really positive emotional relationship. So if we're to go back to using a Nokia, it's quite a struggle for us, and to form that as a habit, it's very unlikely. So I'd say maybe if people just did it one day a week, that kind of thing would work. Now, we all need to slow down. It's as simple as that. But the efficiencies that smartphones give us, most of the time is positive. So I think going all the way back to older technology like the Nokias, there needs to be a meeting point in the middle. So maybe just using that one day a week, but not as a full-time swap.
So you've given some good advice on Android and iPhone apps. Is there any advice that you would give on going to sleep in terms of maybe putting your phone away from you when you go to bed, keeping it away from you so you can't actually reach out and check it, or anything particular that you'd actually offer somebody to actually make themselves sleep a little bit better, or maybe just wind down a little bit easier?
Yeah, well, sleep it's an incredibly precious thing for us as humans. We all know how we feel if we haven't had the number of hours that we require, or even interrupted sleep. And technology, when in the bedroom, is, I said in that Deloitte survey, 40% of us are checking it first thing in the morning, 50% of us are checking it in the middle of the night. And once in a while, if there's an emergency call, fair enough. But ideally, we need to move the technology out of the bedroom. Now, a really simple thing to do is to get an old school alarm clock. Back to that concept of, with the Nokia phone, if you're going back in technology to something that isn't necessarily as sexy or as shiny as a smartphone, it's going to be quite hard to maintain as a habit. So typically what we'd say is you need to find an alarm clock that does something that your smartphone can't do, that you also find aesthetically pleasing. So for children, that might be a Peppa Pig alarm clock. For teenagers, it might be their favorite soccer team alarm clock. For adults, the sort of thing we'd recommend would be the Philips wake up light, which there's no screen, it's just an alarm clock with a very clever bulb technology which wakes you up as if the sun is rising in your bedroom. So immediately you've got something that you like, then you don't form a habit, but it means the technology is removed from the bedroom. Okay,
brilliant. Yeah, I think that's so important this day and age as well. If you were to have a coffee or herbal tea with your 18-year-old self, and you had 5 minutes with them, and you could give them some advice. Now, they mightn't necessarily take the advice, but what advice would you try to give them?
Slow down. I think I was always somebody who, now there's obviously positives of having really strong goals in life, but I was very, very materialistic at 18. I just wanted to have a job which would buy me a fast Alfa Romeo, and I wanted a pretty girl and a champagne lifestyle as soon as I could. I think a lot of that then resulted in me ending up pushing myself too hard in the next 15 years. So it's a funny one, because I was very successful in my sales career, and that's a really positive thing. But for a lot of my kind of from mid-20s to mid-30s, I didn't necessarily have that much satisfaction in my personal life. So I think slowing down and actually just being more aware and present in what I was doing would have been a really positive thing. The other side of it is, where I am now, I am so content with my life. I'm somebody who strives for contentment, not happiness, because happiness will happen. But I think if we just strive for happiness, then we'll be disappointed when we don't get it. So I strive for contentment. So, it's that whole thing of, I could offer my 18-year-old self advice, but where I am now is great. So the fact that I've got here, happy days.
Okay, brilliant. It's really, really good advice. How can people reach out and find out more about you and what your company does?
So we're at unplughq.com. So you can find us there. Our social media, it's kind of ironic that we're on social media, but we post very rarely, and it's important that we are there. That's all unplughq.com as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
Cheers. Chris. To subscribe to the podcast, you can check out on www.wikn.co, or you can stick in WIKN into iTunes or your Android podcast of choice. We're also on Stitcher and SoundCloud as well. Chris has offered us some fantastic advice today. I think you'd be absolutely crazy not to put it into practice. I hope to catch up with you next week, and look forward to seeing you then. Bye.